Digital 410 Media proudly presents the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast with your hosts, Don Abernathy, Jeff Copsetta, and Dennis Blocker.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, your favorite World War II-based podcast. And we're all back here together as one big happy family. Well, Jeff's not happy. He's sitting in the oven tonight because, well, you know, life. Who needs air conditioning in Texas, right, Jeff?
I mean, in August, you don't really need it. It's only 91 degrees in my house right now.
You know, that reminds me, my brother decided to get married in Vegas in August. Yeah. He had us sit in our tuxedos in front of the Bellagio to get that one photo, and unbeknownst to us that the fountains were under maintenance that day, so they were not in schedule. So we sat out in the hot August Vegas sun in tuxedos in front of the Bellagio forever and a day. But yeah, so I kind of know what you feel like. I'm sure it's only, 105 in Texas today?
In the shade, yeah.
It's a dry heat.
It's a dry heat.
Like my dad says, yeah, so is my oven, but I don't want to stick my head in it.
No, it's not a dry heat down here anyway. It's humid, very humid down here.
I don't know. I probably got you beat on the humidity scale. I don't know, Jeff, you got the experience when you were sitting out in the old defunct coconut plantation on Pine Island. Were you saying, boy, this reminds me of home? Or were you all saying, damn, it's hot out here?
Yeah, no, I mean, it is more humid. Dennis is right. San Antonio definitely has more humidity, I think, than where I'm at here in Burnet, but we're higher up. It is a little drier. But nobody beats Florida for humidity. Nobody. Like, Florida's the only place where when you get out of the pool, you're more wet. In Florida.
Jeff's all sweating in his P41s. I had on P42. They're dual layered and reversible. I had on P42 pants. I'm like, la-di-da-di-da. I'm used to this. I usually wear wool in this. That's the joy. That's why we don't do a lot of reenacting in the summertime down here. It's just too damn hot.
Yeah.
So tonight we're going to go down the, we covered it a little bit last week on the best of, or the redeployment episodes we like to call it here on the What's the Scuttlebutt podcast, and that is the Battle of Guadalcanal, and seeing how it is still August 12th, you know, we're still within the realm of that battle, and so we figured we'd go down a little more detail on that. And I like Jeff had a great idea, and that is, you know, let's present the audience with some of the books that we think provide some of the best detail on Guadalcanal. And I have a sneaking suspicion that some of us have the same books stacked up in our room. And so, Jeff, you know, I'll let you kick it off.
Yeah, well, like we talked about last episode, you know, I covered a lot about the World War I that I've been studying here lately, and I'm going to share that book list as well. Don, you can probably just push that on social. I'll get you a good photo of my recommendations there. But I came across this term from a friend. They said you need a junk food book too. And I didn't quite understand what they were talking about, but when you're so like you're just reading scholarly stuff all the time, sometimes it's nice to like, hey, you know what? I love reading, but I do need to like read something, you know, more fun, a little lighter, a little more off topic. And so sometimes I reach for Hemingway, or sometimes I'll reach for Poe, you know, a little bit of literature here and there. But I've been missing reading about World War II and from the Pacific theater. I mean, you know, you guys know we were real heavy, hot and heavy with B-17s. Masters of the Air came out, and all the stuff I love studying there. I was doing a paper about daylight bombing and its, you know, its significance. So, man, it's been a while since I've read about the Pacific, and I've been missing it. So I picked up this book here called No-Bended-Knee, The Battle for Guadalcanal. This is the memoir of General Merrill Twining. And I don't know why we don't hear more about General Twining, because the guy's like the father of everything in the Marine Corps. You know, he served under Smedley Butler. He served under General Vandegrift. Well, when Vandegrift was first Mardiv commander, he was his, you know, part of his one of his advisors. You know, the guy just knew everybody. He picked the location for what became known as Camp Paikakariki in Wellington, New Zealand. Like, this guy was sent to New Zealand ahead of time and, linked up with some New Zealand, both civilian and military personalities down there. And Vandegrift was like, pick a spot for the first Mardiv to live. And so that's what he did. He reconned all this and was like, oh my gosh, this place is great. It was originally known as McKay's Crossing. It's about 20 miles north of Wellington, but it had everything but an arty range. But the arty range was just north of Wellington, closer to town, I guess. So they had that accessibility. They had it was, quarter mile wide, just nice and flat, couple miles long. Um, good mountains to one side. Then they had water access and even some inlets so they could start with this amphibious training that they knew they needed but didn't know what they needed. You know what I mean? So he's the one who picked Camp Pike Hakuriki. Then he was also, and Don, you've talked about this. He's also the guy that helped solve a lot of the worker strikes at the dock there.
Yeah.
He was directly involved in that and was like, "Why don't we do this?" And everybody was like, "You're a genius. Do that." I mean, the guy he retired as a four-star general, but he did everything about everything that had to do uh, with the Marines at the beginning of World War II, and even before that. I mean, the guy served in China, he served in Haiti in the Banana Wars. He's a 1923 Annapolis graduate, and he just elevated through the ranks just miraculously. And he should be up there with names like Butler and Chesty Puller, I mean, and General Holcomb. I mean, this guy worked with all of them, and he was the mastermind.
And to your point, I may have come across his name once or twice in my material, but not enough to that when you said his name. Oh, I didn't hear. Like right now, my mind's like flipping up No Sail, like on an old Looney Tune cartoon. Like, I'm sure I've read his name once or twice, but not enough to like cement a footprint in my brain.
Yeah. So where I'm at in the book now, he is flying in a B-17P model, which I have never heard of. It's they basically put fuel tanks in the bomb bay and put a giant camera in it, and it was strictly for photo recon. So he's flying in a B-17. It's late June. They're told that their first offensive is going to start the 1st of August, and they're like, what? Um, and the initial target was Tulagi.
Let's not skip over that point because that's one of the things that we tend to forget about. Because we talk about Guadalcanal, a lot of the TV shows, a lot of the stories, a lot of the people start off on August 7th, 1942. They learned about Guadalcanal. They learned about the air base that the Japanese were building in June. They landed in July. August 7th. It was originally supposed to be August 1st. They were able to squeeze an extra 6 days out of it. Oh, and by the way, by the end of July, they only had 1/3 of the Marines in Fiji. And so you have about 2 weeks to get the rest of your guys together and then push out that extra 6 days and do your amphibious training, which in Fiji was a huge disaster. They discovered that their training was lacking, their equipment was horrible, but they had no choice. So, and just imagine that. How do you maintain the morale of your troops as an NCO and upper brass after you just had this landing, exercise? It was a complete disaster. It's like what, July 22nd, and August 7th, we're doing the real thing. How do you maintain that straight face and morale, yet try to do as much work as you can in the background to get as much stuff done and get the equipment that you need to make this thing a success?
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, and he talks about that. Essentially, when they left, they thought they were going to another training mission. He said, we just hadn't told them yet that they were going to use ball ammunition instead of blanks for this next training op, this amphibious training op. But so Tulagi was actually target number one. So he's flying over, reconning in one B-17, flying over Tulagi, and then they fly over Guadalcanal, and they see not a completed airfield, but they see what's obviously going to be an airstrip on Guadalcanal. And he sees the coral that surrounded Tulagi. It's very mountainous. There's not a lot of great beaches. So he identified right away, Tulagi is not the place where you're going to be able to land a large contingent of Marines. And then as he flew over Guadalcanal, they actually they went ahead and cleared their weapons and checked their weapons. So he's up in what would be the bombardier position of the B-17. And he's got a 50 up there. So he goes ahead and he fires a few rounds over what would eventually become Red Beach. And he said, I'm pretty sure I'm the first Marine in the 1st Marine Division to fire on the Japanese target of Guadalcanal, before anybody else. Because, like I said, this is July. Um, so he sees the beaches at Guadalcanal much more favorable for a larger amphibious operation. They're not as shallow. He can see deep, dark blue water right up to the beach. So there's kind of a shelf too. It's much easier. It's not all rugged and real skinny, where they're going to just be, um, uh, beaching these LCVPs too far out. He knows it's good deep water coming up into Guadalcanal. They see the airfield, fly past Coley Point. They actually take some rounds from several Japanese fighters that they have to fight off. So there's an aerial battle inside of this B-17. They're doing all kinds of maneuver and evasive action in the air to finally get the heck out of there. So, well, yeah, like when we think of Guadalcanal, you think that, oh, this must have been months and months and months and months in the planning, and they just picked August 7th maybe because of predicted weather or the moon or the tide. And it's like, no, no, none of that. Like 2 weeks out, they were still like, we're not, what's Guadalcanal? And General Twining was the one who was like, yeah, that's where we need to send the division. And it was so ridiculous. This is how ridiculous the expectations were for the Marine Corps at this time. They were to land on Guadalcanal, then land on Bougainville, then land in Rabaul by September 20th. And he said, of course, they didn't specify what year, but it was expected that they were going to take the entire Solomon chain by the 20th of September, 1942.
And I was trying to find the specs. You're talking about a B-17P with photo equipment. We're not talking about high-grade super telephoto lenses that these photographers at the Super Bowl use to shoot down the football field to get the sweat. I mean, I was trying to find what the zoom level is on these. I couldn't find the number, but I can tell you this. When they took these black and white films and they were planning, they would still use magnifying glasses to try to zoom in on these photos. I mean, It was maybe X2 at the most. I mean, it's like trying to shoot 400 yards with a red dot. I mean, you're not getting very good. And that was the technology of the day. Black and white, super grainy, and the height in which they're flying is all relative to how much shots are taken from, small arms fire when they're getting these photos. And I can't remember who was the famous author back in the day. Maybe he wrote Robinson Crusoe. Oh, what was the author's name? I can't remember. Who's that?
Defoe?
No, I'd have to go. It always slips my mind. I think Lecky talks about it in his
Guadalcanal Diary.
No, it was before the Guadalcanal Diaries. Before they actually had Guadalcanal, they were trying to
Kipling?
do the. I'll tell you guys next week. It slipped my mind. I think Lecky talks about it in Strongman Arm. When they were doing the planning for Guadalcanal, they could only find maps from the hardcover of a fiction book writer from like 1920s books. And so like they're literally using these outlines of the island, and then they would go into Australia, and they'd find these old Australian coconut farmers, and they would like, here's the only maps we have. Can you give us any information? And so the only true logistics they had was the aerial reconnaissance Jeff was just explaining, and then these kind of hand-drawn maps from these fiction and biography books from the 1920s about just living in the South Pacific. And then they would find old coconut plantation farmers who used to work on the island before the Japanese invaded, and try to get them in between beers to write an authentic logistical map to use for this landing. And the whole thing was just an uphill battle from the word go.
Yeah, and he talks about, it's funny you bring up the map. So they were armed with a National Geographic map of the Solomons from the 1930s. when they
Wow.
did this photo recon. Yeah, and there were some updated maps, but they never kind of got through the chain. And he kind of talks about that and some of the, um, you know, some of the guys that didn't always do their job well, in the Corps and in different levels. So yeah, and so the author you may be thinking of is Jack London. I know Lecky refers to Jack London,
Yeah,
the
he was
Terrible
saying that they
Psalms.
used Jack
Yeah,
London novels, and like when you
yeah,
open up the hardcover in the front or the back, there'd be a brief drawing of Guadalcanal and some
yeah,
very few landmarks, and they would
My
take those
gosh.
maps. Yeah,
yeah.
so Jack London books.
Yeah. So yeah, it blows my mind. I mean, obviously we know Tulagi they invaded on the 7th as well, but not in force. I think it was only 3 companies of the First Raider Battalion. I want to say maybe Able, Baker, and Dog, if I'm remembering. Maybe not, but and maybe the Paramarines may have sent a company or two. But I mean, Tulagi's a nothing island, but it had that was the harbor for the roof, the Japanese float plane harbor there, the seaplane tender area. But I mean, I've read about Guadalcanal before, but I can't say enough. No Bended Knee is like this. This is where it's at, and it's an interesting title too. Um, and I'll shut up for a little bit, but um, in the preface here, it starts off as, quote, "The bended knee is not a tradition of our Corps. If the Marine as a fighting man has not made a case for himself after 170 years of service, he must go. But I think that you will agree with me that he has earned the right to depart with dignity and honor, not by subjugation to the status of uselessness and servility planned for him by the War Department," end quote. Now that's from General Vandegrift when he was Commandant of the Marine Corps testifying before the Senate Naval Affairs Committee 6th of May, 1946. And I know we've talked about it maybe only once on What's a Scuttlebutt, but a lot of people don't know the Marine Corps was all but canned after World War II. Um, and I'm not a former Marine, um, but I have an appreciation for them. And that is also why Sands of Iwo Jima is one of my favorite movies because there is a significance to it because that was a push to save the Marine Corps at the end of the 1940s as the decade came to a close to really try to show the public that it's a viable military force that is necessary for specific combat, specific situations. And they built a movie around some of these real things on Tarawa and Iwo Jima. Some of the guys played themselves, and you got to put the biggest name in lights to play the lead role, which in 1949 was John Wayne. So, really, really cool. Really highly recommend No Bended Knee.
Could you imagine the history of the Korean War if the Marine Corps was in fact shelved after World War II? WLVN 1940s Radio, the place to go if you want authentic, real-time 1940s music, sports events, news, and much more. If you have a World War II event coming up, and as much of us do at our Living History events, sometimes we get a nice old-fashioned radio, we'll put a Bluetooth speaker in it, and we'll stream some appropriate music. Problem is every once in a while when you're streaming that music, a Pandora ad might kick in, or a YouTube ad, or whatever host commercial from where you're playing this music, unless you've taken the time to record your own music and save it as a file. We can do you one better. Head over to WLVN 1940s Radio or simply click the link on our website. Go and stream their music live. Thanks to the station manager over at WLVM, Mr. Anthony Leota, who has painstakingly taken his time to get authentic sports events, radio broadcasts, news broadcasts from the time, and he builds a radio station in real time, just like a modern day radio station. Modern day radio stations has an entire schedule built from 12 a.m. until 12 a.m. the following day of all the music, commercial spots, and stories that are going to be ran throughout the day. Anthony has done the same thing, except for his music comes from the 1940s and 1930s. His news reports are actual news reports that were archived from the 1940s. His sporting events are actually archived from the 1940s. So if you want a very authentic, very original concept way to listen to music and content from the 1940s, head over to WLVN1940sradio.com.
When the guys were looking for maps, it also rings similar to the Tarawa, right, where they were getting old sea captains to sell them how the reef conditions were over the how much water would be over the reef, and if there were channels, and they were going to these old dodgy the British even described them as dodgy, the sea captains. And Tarawa gave birth to the LCI gunboat. But as far as the LCI goes, in 42 it was being used in the Atlantic, but it really hadn't made its appearance and it wasn't at Guadalcanal for sure. Now later on, they would do stops, they would do service calls, and they would resupply, and they would do practice landings and this and that on Guadalcanal. Some of the guys would talk about, of course, the history of it, and then they were in awe of it. And then they'd get to stop in and be able to tell their families for all times that they had stopped there on an LCI at Guadalcanal. But there wasn't any. They would use them to ferry them around, troops around Guadalcanal and in between islands and this and that. They would use the LCIs, even to land troops, because they were still weeding out little pockets of snipers and this and that. So they'd hear a rumor of we're having some trouble, this and such an island in that chain, and they'd grab an LCI with, like you said, 100 guys. Because you could put, over 200 guys on an LCI. It was basically a company, which is pretty awesome. And, then they'd take them to these different pockets. My expertise and interest in Guadalcanal really just comes through the movies. I, of course, have met some Guadalcanal veterans and got their autographs and this and that when I was younger. But, and of course, it has, it's something to say. I was listening to an audiobook today about Nathan Bedford Forrest, and here's this guy who he had no military experience, and he's the only one in the whole North and South that went from private to lieutenant general. And he is, he doesn't know. His theory was get there firstest with the mostest. and and there's a lot to be said about, and that's kind of when Jeff was talking about what was being done there, and you were talking about the maps, it made me think of Nathan Bedford Forrest. It was kind of like there's something to be said about just throwing bodies in there and throwing humanity at an island, and then just trying to work it out later. At least let's get the people there, and they did. So that's a rugged way to do it, but that's what they had to do.
And to that point, the history of the Battle of Guadalcanal has forever been have to put an asterisk in it, because the maps were so bad off that the Battle of the Tenarú was actually the Elu River. It wasn't the Tenarú River was 3 miles away. So they referred to it as the Battle of Tenarú because they thought it was the Tenarú River, but it's actually the Elu River. And so, having the lack of information available to you, something as simple as that just puts a permanent asterisk in history when people are reading up on this.
I would say that if anybody wants to, when I was a kid, the movie that really captured my imagination for Guadalcanal was called Pride of the Marines with John Garfield.
I thought he was going to say A Thin Red Line.
No. And John Garfield, he portrays a real Marine, Al Schmidt, who gets the Medal of Honor, but he gets blinded, and his loader is wounded, and he can't fire, but he's got eyes. And so Al Schmidt, he tells him, tell me where they're at. Tell me where they're at. Lee, and it's Lee Diamond, I think was the guy's name who was with him. And so he's like to the left, and he's just firing to the right, firing. And it's like, man, when I was a kid, and they're creeping up on the left, and they're creeping up on the right, and they're getting closer and closer. I highly recommend that movie, and also my affinity for anything having to do with PTSD and showing its realities. It does get into that too, very, very adequately, and it's a great movie, Pride of the Marines. That's what really captured my imagination about Guadalcanal.
They dug in on that gun pit, I think, for 2 days. There was originally 3 of them. The third one got shot in the head, and then, as you're saying, one of them's hands got taken out, and then the other one's eyes he got blinded from shrapnel and explosions and or just debris. Yeah, so between the two of them, they had a good pair of eyes and a good pair of hands, and they worked together,
Man,
and they were able to get it done. But yeah, it's
that's
just
rugged.
the amount of energy and effort, and to get all that done. And keep in mind, for those y'all who maybe aren't up to speed on Guadalcanal, we were still using 1903 bolt action rifles. Now, luckily for us, so were the Japanese, and so it was kind of level playing field. But the Garand hadn't been introduced yet, and so the only thing we had on that island that was semi-automatic, well, fully automatic to that point, were the Thompson and the Browning automatic rifle. But unlike what you see in the movies, you might have one. Well, obviously you had the 30 cal, the Ma Deuces and that. But as far as the non-machine gun pits go, you had 1903 rifles. You had the few Thompsons around, which were primarily good for short range, and then some Browning automatic rifles. But all the infantrymen, they were just shooting bolt action rifles. And much like the M1 Garand, those clips held 8 rounds, but that's 8 rounds of cocking, shooting, reloading. It's not pop, 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 pop. To which we also learned that when they were forced to turn over their 1903s for the M1 Garand, a lot of the Marines, they did not want to. They found that they were more accurate. And there's got to be some truth to that, because to this day, snipers still use bolt action rifles, and there's a reason for that. And so when they left Guadalcanal and they were training, when they had to switch to the M1 Garand, a lot of the guys were not happy about it. They would rather keep their 1903s.
Yeah, and I think we need to remember too that it's not so much the Garand was not introduced yet; it's just it hadn't trickled to the Marine Corps.
Yeah, the Army got it first.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, absolutely. I mean, a 1903 Springfield put up against a Type 99 or even a Type 38, pretty even playing field, with the exception of probably a more accurate Springfield, slightly larger round, especially than the Type 38. That was like a 6.5 or something. But yeah, and I think the other unique thing about Guadalcanal too is, and I told you guys I'm rewatching the Pacific. I usually watch the Pacific in the heat of the summer and Band of Brothers in the winter. So it's August. It's hot as it's going to get. And like I said, with our AC that went out yesterday, it's like, yes, babe, let's huddle around the living room and sweat and watch these guys hit Guadalcanal.
And she's like, I'll watch Guadalcanal, but we're not huddling. It's too hot. You sit 5 feet over there. We each get our own fan.
But it's one of the few battles where, and they deliver this marvelously too in episode 1. Why are we here? And there's just this argument. There's something about the shipping lanes. Oh, we're keeping the Japs out of Australia. Well, that doesn't happen a whole lot throughout the island hopping campaign, right? Like, why are we here? Well, because this is an unsinkable aircraft carrier. Why are we here? Well, because the B-29s need someplace to land. Or why are we here? Well, we need a place for B-29s to fly from. Like, everything. Why are we here? Well, because MacArthur wants to come back. Like everything else really was pretty legitimate. I mean, I know you can make arguments. Could we have starved out the Japanese garrison of Peleliu? Maybe. Could we have starved them out even in some of the other islands in the Solomons? Maybe. I don't know. But Guadalcanal is really the first one. I mean, we adopt a Europe first strategy. FDR promises the Hitler issue is going to get solved first, and it takes us till November of 42 to put boots on the ground for the European campaign. So here we are in August, 2 weeks before D-Day, and we don't even know what freaking island we're going to hit. Like, we got some light colonel flying around in a B-17 going, actually, I think that would be better. So ad hoc. And like you said, only a third of the division was actually there. They're waiting for the other ones to come in. Now there's nobody there to unload because of the strikes in Wellington. And then there's this rumor that there's a Raider battalion, and nobody can point out who the heck even Red Mike Edson is. He's like, I don't know who this guy is. Then there's issues with the New Zealanders because, they're off doing their thing, and they didn't want to give the Marines too much along the coastline to train because the New Zealanders they think they've got their whole island secured with their military, and they didn't want to have to depend, like if there's an invasion, they didn't want to have to depend on any strip of their coastline. Like, well, the First Marine Division is training there, so I guess they're just going to defend it. Like there was that that whole thing too was very complex.
Wow.
But like, hey, we need you guys to move so we can train. And New Zealand's like, well, we need to stay here because we're defending our country. This is it's just intriguing to me. The whole thing before 7 August. Once they hit, we can talk that all day long, and we can beat that to death. But it's interesting how it started.
And then you got some enterprising young men on a ship saying, hey, Jeff, I can't help but notice that undershirt we're wearing is pretty awfully bright white. Maybe if we go down and get some old coffee, we could dye our shirts brown so that we don't have this big bright white target underneath our green blouses when we hit the beach. And then, your kid probably has done it. Maybe you've tried it. How many of you have ever tried to put on an M1 helmet without a liner? How comfortable is that? Now imagine your liner is made out of essentially paper and cotton coating. You're going into the jungles. You're getting wet. You're getting sand. You're sweating in this thing all day. It's slowly starting to disintegrate. And now you get this steel pot rattling around in your head because it doesn't fit the way it should, because you're doing everything in your power to keep your liner from disintegrating as you're just sitting in a foxhole waiting to move out. The whole thing is just... Oh, and by the way, you're wearing a web belt that your grandfather wore in 1914, 1916. It's just the whole thing. And, they jokingly talk about how they feel like their K rations come from a dog food company and just the whole thing. And then...
Oh, and they're sick the whole time, too. Malaria.
Or you land and
Trapping.
you have the battle of that battle of the four sitting ducks, they called it. And then your George S. Eliot sank, or George F. Eliot sank. And so the rest of the Navy pulls out. And so now you have no food, no toilet paper, limited ammo, and you felt like you've been left behind by your country. And now you're stuck on this island, thousands of miles away from reinforcements for God knows how long. And all you have is what you have in your what you have is what you have in your light sack, because the bottom and the rest of your gear was left on the ship with somebody from each platoon whose job it was to look after your poncho, your tents, your extra shoes, the whole bottom of your pack that has your extra uniform in it, because it was supposed to be a light landing. Then they're going to bring the rest of your crap, because for those of you who don't know, the web gear, you have an upper, a lower, then you have your shelter half, you have your blanket. All that was peeled off. They were going to land in their light battle packs. And once we clear a night's beachhead, all that stuff will be offloaded. And, when you come, once we set up a perimeter and we feed guys in and out, then you can come back, get the rest of your gear, the rest of your personal effects, your tent, your blankets and all that, all sank. And so now you're out there with what little you thought to bring with you, because you're like, and that's different for each guy, right? It's like, well, we'll get the stuff later. I don't want to be hunkered down with all this extra crap I'm not going to need until tomorrow or until 2 days from now. And so some guys had more stuff than other guys, depending on what you decided to personally leave behind with the rest of your gear. And all of it's gone. And so now you're stuck with what ammo you have in your web belt and what few items you have in your upper musette bag.
Yeah, and another interesting factor too that Twining talks about is all the cases that they unloaded with cornflakes. He said the whole harbor was just floating cornflakes because the cardboard, as it rained, it just disintegrated, and all these cornflakes it's just cornflake flotsam everywhere in the harbor.
Yeah.
Like, man.
To Jeff's point, during the dock union workers strike in New Zealand, because apparently either they didn't get the news, they didn't realize the efforts we were to trying to save Australia and New Zealand from being raided by the Japanese. They were striking, and the Marine Corps was like, well, that's fine, we got guys who did this crap back in the United States, so they know how to operate this machinery. Because the other problem is too, which I think needs to be said, is we were in such a hurry to get men over, they didn't battle load the ships. And what they try to do is they'll put X amount of ammo, X amount of food, X amount of whatever on each ship, so that each ship has roughly the same amount of materials in case one gets lost or sank. You're not losing all your ammo, But they didn't do that. They just, all the ammo was here, all the food was there. So they had to offload all this stuff, which is why the union workers went on strike, because they didn't want to work 24 hours a day without getting a raise. They wanted more money. And sorry, that's not going to happen. You're getting your wages, and so they went on strike. And so our Marines were offloading all the food, all this, and it's just a monsoon season. And like Jeff said, the cardboard boxes that the Frosted Flakes were falling apart. The labels on the peaches versus the apple peels, all the labels on the cans fell off. And so now you just have mounds of cornflakes getting soggy, and then all these cans. You don't know if one's canned meat, one's peaches, whatever. And so they're just trying to battle load all this stuff and working in 8-hour shifts, 24 hours a day in this monsoon. And it's just
Yeah.
a freaking nightmare.
Yeah, and so with the strikes are interesting because Twining said in one 24-hour period there were 14 strikes. Every few minutes it was like, oh, you have this, we can't touch that, or we need this kind of crane. No, like somebody got a splinter strike. It's like they ran every way. And he was the one that approached. There was an American oil company that was offloading a bunch of stuff, and he said if he could remember the name of it, he would never buy a gallon of gas from another company. But he went to them, and they had ramps that he said they looked like ladders, but where the rungs were rollers. So, and they lent them to him, so the Marines, and there wasn't a whole lot. There wasn't a whole lot of Marines there to actually do this job, where they put these rungs together and they could just roll stuff down the ships. And he said he feels bad because they were never returned. When they went to return them, one of the top brass was like, no, we're going to need these for the rest of the war. So they never made their way back.
Anybody who's worked in a modern day shipping and receiving department, we still use those. They're like an accordion. Yeah. They just, now the newer ones are accordions, but yeah, they got six rollers lined up, and they're staggered, and that's how you roll boxes off of the back of a truck and into the warehouse.
Back of a C-130.
Yep. Yeah, it's just, and I've told this story before, long before I had the podcast. I was down on Fort Myers Beach doing computer work at an ice cream shop, and came out, and there's a car parked there, and the guy has a 1st Marine Division hat on, and I asked him, I said, when did you serve? He's like, from 1942 up until 44. And then I said, oh, were you there in New Zealand for the strikes? And he said, yeah. And so I started talking to him about all the non-war related stuff, and he just lit up, because I'm sure through his entire life, probably from the 70s on, when young kids would ask him about the war, they want to hear the gruesome stuff, and here's some random 30-year-old at the time asking him about cornflakes and labelless cans of beans on the docks, and he remembers working through all that stuff. But
that's the good stuff.
It's just like, how crazy is that the union's like, hey, we need more money, we're not going to do this. It's like, we're kind of here helping you guys, right? But I don't know. They were coming out of the worldwide Great Depression, so I guess, they figure it's government money. There's got to be money coming in. But yeah.
I don't know, I feel like somebody like Patton probably would have had him shot.
He would have been down there smacking people left and right.
Yeah, for
coward,
sure.
Coward.
I don't think there'd have been a protest or a strike going on.
So if you guys want to learn more about Guadalcanal and the Pacific, I got a stack of books here that I was going to present some of them as good source materials. Think I'd be remiss if we don't mention this one, just because this gentleman's been on our show. Adam Makos's Voices of the Pacific. Very good book. I'm sure Jeff has this one. He did mention it. I think Dennis mentioned it. Guadalcanal Diaries. Very good book.
So good. Is that a first edition, Don?
I don't know if it's a first edition.
Kind of got that first edition.
It's got that green cover. Let's see. What's the copyright? Copyright 1943, Random House.
Yeah.
I'm not sure when the... And then
awesome.
Richard B. Frank's Guadalcanal. Another good one. And aforementioned Strongman Armed. United States Marine versus Japan. I'm lucky enough, someone gave me their edition of this book, so I have actually 2 versions of this book with alternating covers. So I have this one and the other cover. And then the Great Battle Series, The Battle for Guadalcanal. It's another book that I have. And so those are all I have more, but these are just ones I grabbed off my library. But yeah,
that's awesome. That's a good collection you got there.
Most of my collection actually does revolve around the Pacific, and that's one of the things I was thinking when Jeff was talking about he's doing all these papers and reading on World War One, and then Masters of the Air, and I've been reading a lot of European theater. It's kind of weird yet scary how as you start focusing on another campaign, how some of this stuff kind of, something you knew in great detail kind of gets a little hazy. It's like before we went on tonight, I was going back and watching YouTube videos on the Guadalcanal just to refresh myself. I've read all these books, but because we haven't talked about it in great detail in at least 2 years, some of that information is just not as crisp as it once was. And so, I might have to go back and reread some of these books just to get that information and I guess too, that's probably why when you see historians, you have a lot of historians who specialize in one particular realm, because when you do try to spread your knowledge over a lot of different areas, especially in World War II, because there is so much to cover that, it serves you better, I guess, if you want to be an expert in something or a go-to guy in something, if you just continuously read and research that particular area and maybe not so much a bunch of different things, because then your brain's like a hard drive. There's only so much room for some memory, and sometimes some of it's got to get pushed deep down in some sector somewhere that probably needs to be defragged because the information is not readily
for sure.
quickly being pulled up.
We all can't be Richard Frank, that's for sure.
Yeah, you need to make the choice. You either need to know a lot about a little or know a little about a lot. And it's tough. I think for me, I'd rather know a little about a lot than the other way around. Even though I do kind of zone in on something and, try to just go all in, and then like, okay, something totally different. And then you're right. A couple years later, I'm like, I read like 15 books on that. I don't even remember. Like it just runs together. But well, I'm glad you brought up Rich Frank's book. I also own it, but I've never read it. So I don't want to say that I recommend it, of course. I mean, obviously we know Rich Frank, and I've done some other work with him, webinar series and things like that. He's a great guy. I know he's an amazing author, but I have not read that one. Yes, Don, Guadalcanal Diary. Now this is the 1955 version of the book. This is the first book I ever read about World War II. I think I was 13 or 14. So yeah, you have to recommend that one.
Yeah, for sure.
Edson's Raiders, 1st Marine Battalion in World War II. This is by Colonel Alexander. Not just one of the best books about this particular subject in Guadalcanal and the Marines in the early part of the war, but this is a great book just strictly on a combat experience, on leadership. Colonel Alexander is a combat veteran himself and former Marine, so this is going to be good. If you Dennis, you probably have read Utmost Savagery, his book on Tarawa. That's one of my favorites. So this is Edson's Raiders is just a really good book on the combat experience as a whole, and a deep dive on what it's like to be in a special unit, at the early stages of the Second World War. And then I went with the last one. I went with Bloody Ridge and Beyond. This is a memoir of Edson's Raiders in the Pacific. So this is by Marlon Whitey Groft. Guys, you know me. I'm not much. There you go. There it is. I'm not much on memoirs to learn about the battle, right? Because that's a very finite perspective of the battle, when you read a memoir, but it's important. But I was pleasantly surprised with how good that book was. So we'll take some good pictures and we'll push this all out for the listeners and post this. And I'm gonna have to do some mail call and some final thoughts, and then I'm gonna have to pop off.
Real quick, just because we mentioned Robert Leckie, Challenge for the Pacific is another one he did, which is really good. And then, as I said, I have 2 different varying covers of Strongmen Armed. And I think the Guadalcanal books I got at the Fort Myers Flea Market, there's a guy out there with a huge selection. I'm glad I saved this one. This one says Discard. From back when it was in the library somewhere. They were going to throw it away, and luckily somebody saved it and ended up in my collection. But yeah, mail call. We want to hear from you. Send us an email at mailcall@WTSPWWII-ep.com. That is WTSPWWII.com. or you can reach out to us on our Facebook or Instagram page. Jeff?
Yeah, so this mail call actually didn't come through as an email. It came through one of our social platforms. So it says here, listening to What's the Scuttlebutt latest episode, and Jeff Copsetta was talking about some P-51 artwork he purchased, and that sounded awfully familiar to me. Let's just say you got a cool piece, Jeff. Out in the living room is our 8th Air Force wall of art and photos, one of which is this piece depicting Huey Lamb of the 78th Fighter Group shooting down an Arado 234 jet bomber on March 19th, 1945, near Osnabrück, Germany. Huey signed several of these prints, and I was lucky enough to purchase this 3 years ago. Huey flew 61 combat missions with the 78th Fighting Group, scoring 2.5 kills in air-to-air combat. His half kill comes from his action with the AR-234 that he shared with Captain Winfield Brown, Huey's flight leader of that mission. What's crazy is that this wasn't Huey's first jet kill. Prior to this, he shot down an Me-262 on October 15th, 1944, while flying a P-47 Thunderbolt. 2 jet kills, one in a P-47, one in a P-51. Truly remarkable. Huey just turned 100, and he resides in Texas. Now, this came to us from Military Aviation Art, which we talked about. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me make sure I said that correctly. Um, we talked about them last show. They reached out to me. I'm sorry, Military Aerospace Art. Military Aerospace Art. They're over in Duxford. And they are sending me these prints, and I cannot wait because one of those is going to go to you guys, one of our listeners. That's going to be one of our giveaways. And so looking forward to that. I can't wait. And then, of course, to receive mine as well. Um, so lastly, and I'm gonna let you guys continue the great talk on Guadalcanal. I'm sorry I have to kind of cut it short this episode. Um, but we've got a lot of exciting things coming up. Excited to announce that on the 16th of September next month, September 16th, we are going to have the one, the only Captain Dale Dye as a guest on What's the Scuttlebutt podcast. We set this up a few weeks ago and we kind of hinted to it last episode. We've got a firm date now. So if you want to hear about Captain Dale Dye's experiences, and now look, we're not going to ask him a lot of stuff that our listeners can Google, right? Now, if listeners, obviously, if you want to, send us a question, email us, whatever, we'll try to get to it, try to get it answered. But like I told Captain Dye, we're interested in the man, we're interested in the Marine, we're interested in the author, Dale Dye. Are we going to talk some of his movies? Probably. It's inevitable. But again, we don't obviously we don't want to waste his time, and by answering or asking him things that we could probably find the answer elsewhere, and especially for the listeners too. I mean, you can Google Dale Dye. You don't have to listen to our show. We want to get some great quality material from him. Learn about his 21 years in the Marine Corps. Learn about him being a Mustang, going enlisted to officer, and then eventually retiring as a captain. And how his work in Hollywood came about. I think it's an interesting story. It was just like this ain't right. We need somebody to train these people. Hollywood's doing this thing all wrong. So it's going to be a really amazing show. So that'll be airing third week in September. Looking forward to that. Prior to that, on the 7th of September, I'll be speaking at the Tex Hill Wing in San Antonio. Dennis just spoke there not that long ago. So I'm looking forward to having my turn as a guest speaker. I'm going to be talking about rationing during World War II. So I'll have a pretty nice display there. I'll be dressed as some kind of a grunt. I haven't decided yet, Army or Marines, probably Army in the Pacific. So it's for the cadets. So the kids will get to see some cool uniform gear and then look at where this stuff came from, right? All the things that went to war and how rationing worked. And then Dennis and I are going to be linking up at the Wish for Our Heroes Gala in San Antonio. Hopefully, maybe we can even get Don to make the trip. We'll see. But be looking for pictures from that night. Last year I was there. Of course, Scott Gibson was there. Got to hang out with Kyle Chandler. If you don't know him, from the World War II perspective, he was actor in Catch 22 series with George Clooney.
Mm-hmm.
And there's always one or two World War II veterans that show up there as well. So it's gonna be an amazing night. They raise a lot of money for veterans today. That's what they do. They grant wishes for veterans today that are struggling for whatever reason. Last year's gala, we raised about $700,000. So it's a big deal. It's a lot of fun. Then we've got an air show that I'm helping plan the second weekend in November. So lots of fun and exciting things coming down our way here in Texas, in the San Antonio area. So if you're in the area, you live around San Antonio, live in Central Texas, come out and see me. Love to meet you. I forgot to mention last episode when I was in Fredericksburg, had somebody keep Mr. Cupstead, Mr. Cupstead. And everybody was just crazy. It was nuts, and I can't hear real good, but I heard my name, and this guy comes up to me, shakes it. Man, nice to meet you in person. I won the very first signed N block giveaway that you guys did on What's the Scuttlebutt. And I was like, oh man, that's great. I said, you live around here? He goes, no, I live in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I was
Wow, made me look bad.
all right. But he was there with the group that was doing the Peleliu, the tactical out there. So that's pretty cool. Ironically, my wife was in Fort Lauderdale that same weekend for a girls' weekend, which is why she wasn't with me in Fredericksburg. So it's a small world. Anyway, but I do have to cut it short. You guys have a great night. I can't wait to see and hear what Dennis and Donna have to talk about for the rest of the show. And I'll see y'all in about a week.
And if you guys want an opportunity to win the print that Jeff was talking about, head over to WTSPWWII-ep-192-No-Bended-Kneel.com. Click on the Patreon link, sign up and subscribe. It goes a long way to support what we do here, and it doesn't matter if you choose the $1 a month, the $3 a month, or the $7 a month tier. All you have to do is be an active paid subscriber. You cannot be a free tier member. We do offer free tier, but you have to be a paid member to be in that drawing. And while you're there, head over to WTSPWorldWar2.com, click on the merch link, and get yourself a hat like the one Jeff and I are wearing, or get a shirt like the one Dennis is wearing, plus much more. We have, it's hot now. Winter's coming up. We have all the shirt prints that we see, we have available in hooded sweatshirts as well. So, if you want the shirt that Jeff was wearing with the young man with the coffee mug, the coffee guy, we have that available on hooded sweatshirts as well. So head over to WTSPWorldWar2.com.
You can have vegetables, lots of them, on your table next winter. You can have your own fresh vegetables on your table this summer if you have your own Victory Garden. Yes, there's no restriction on home canning and home processing of vegetables and garden fruits and berries. Plan your Victory Garden now. Get your garden plot lined up. Get the advice of a garden expert if you need it, and be prepared to grow your own for victory. Join a garden club or a community garden movement, or share a garden with your neighbor. You can help win the battle of food production. You can help our fighting men get the food they need. You can help save the vital metals used in commercial canning if you grow your own Victory Garden in 1943. For further information, write to Victory Gardens, Washington, D.C. Victory Gardens, Washington, D.C.
I'm progressing along nicely with my my short story series that I'm starting. I've been writing this book for a long time, and I just had this gut feeling that it needed more, and so it's going to be about the Bonsai Cliff at Saipan, and the civilians that were killing themselves. I interviewed over a dozen LCI sailors who were on different gunboats: 441, 449, 77, 346, 438, 726. So like all these different gunboats, and they all talked very candidly about it. And I decided to branch out and also include the for better context, to also include ground forces. So I do have Marine Corps perspectives as well, and two war correspondents who were there at the time, including Chergaskis, and hopped in a Jeep and went up north to see if the rumors were true, and got there and saw that it was actively happening, and wrote about it.
I think that's a very important subject matter. I mean, I'm sure there's some books out there, or maybe not, I mean, you hear about it vaguely on some old History Channel TV shows. They'll show some
Yeah, they
footage
get
of them.
about a paragraph or two
Yeah,
in
you
books.
might see a paragraph, but I don't think I've come across or heard or had anybody recommend a entire book about that subject matter. And it's so important not only to show the level of, I guess it'd be fair to call brainwashing on the part of the Empire
For sure.
of Japan,
Yeah.
how they treated people that they were controlling. But more importantly, well, I don't want to say, it's unfair to say more importantly, but just as important, the impact that it had on our Marines and soldiers. It's one thing to see horrible things happen to the enemy, right? That's part of combat, is to compartmentalize things. You know, they're the enemy, or at least right now. You can deal with that when you get home, but right here and now, they're the enemy. It's kill them before they kill you, versus seeing mothers throwing babies off of cliffs and then jumping because they were brainwashed into thinking that we're cannibals and rapists and murderers, and if we beat the Japanese, that we're going to do horrible, atrocious things to their population, to the fact that they're literally killing themselves because they're so terrified of what they were told we were going to do to them if we won the battles. And I think that is of great importance. And the fact that you have this collection of interviews that you did so long ago, long before you were on a podcast, you know, long before you even had the idea of this book, you're just a young man
for sure.
with an interest and the means to interview these guys, and you had the foresight to get it on tape cassette recordings, to have this 15, 20, 25 years later to go back and use for resource material. I mean, that is materials that so many new and existing World War II authors would love. You know, because if you think about it, that completely separates you from a huge swath of these current authors, because they're all going to National Archives. They're all going to the same well to find that uncovered treasure, right? So many authors, so many researchers have gone to these different sources of information, but they're all the same different sources of information. And if they get lucky, they might find something on a shelf that hasn't been discovered in the last 80 years. Whereas you have an entire catalog of interviews that no one's heard but you and the person who gave you that interview so many years ago. You have literally a treasure trove of information that no one else has access to.
Yeah, it's really cool the way you laid that out. It's absolutely correct, and I've got so many interviews that I did with veterans of Tarawa and Marines and soldiers and in the Philippines, and just like all these interviews that were done that I did, and they've just been, you know, they're sitting waiting for their time, and that's what kind of gave me the idea. Originally, I had I wanted a goal to, and I still will. I want to write a complete history of LCI operations in World War II, and it'll be a collection of books, kind of like oh gosh, I forgot the guy's name who did the history of the Navy in World War II, Morrison. Kind of like that, but you know, short stories. Not as in depth, of course, but you know, well researched, all the action reports, war diaries, decklogs, firsthand accounts, maps, charts, everything, all included, photographs. All that work's been done. So I'm really excited about this short story series that I'm going to do, and I think folks are really going to like it. I've had some folks read it. And they're just really moved. They had no idea. And one takeaway, and then maybe we can go, is that, you know, what you said about the guys being horrified at seeing these families kill themselves. There was a group of Marines that were just disgusted, like just watching these families killing their kids, and just disgusted with these families. And this Japanese father, he's got his son out on the reef in the water splashing around them. And so they're actually down below. They hadn't jumped. And he's got his son out there. He looks to be a toddler. And he looks up at the Marines, and the Marines are looking down at him, and they just make eye contact. And the guy reaches down and just chokes his toddler and just chokes him to death. and then just lets him wash out into the surf. And then he makes this throat cut symbol with his finger across his own throat. And the Marines call his bluff. They reach down and they grab a straight razor and they toss it out to him. And he takes it and cuts his throat and bleeds out. And
well, I will say the one thing that Japanese aren't short on is Harry Carey.
For sure. Yeah.
And to the other point too is we often think about soldiers and sailors and Marines being, 17, 18, 19-year-olds. A lot of those guys are fathers. A lot of those guys are new fathers who hadn't had the opportunity. They have newly born babies, toddlers at home. And so they've been writing to their wives or to their moms, who was the grandmother of kids, about, hey, I can't wait to come home and see Junior. Just his whole goal is to survive the war so he can go see his child that he's never seen. Yeah. And then see people doing this to children in the same ages of what they're trying to get back to.
Yep.
It just had to completely destroy them.
Yeah, and what's really scary, Don, and listening to the guys talk, was this other aspect that I had never even thought of. And then when they saw what was happening, they made a realization, and it scared them, and it really was a gut punch to their morale. They thought, we're going to have to kill every single Japanese to get home. Because if these people are doing this, they're never going to surrender. We're going to have to kill everybody. And that was hard to swallow for these guys. It was really hard because they didn't want to have to freaking kill everybody. They wanted to just get it over with and get home. And now they're realizing, nope, we're going to have to kill everyone.
Which, before we wrap it up, goes to the point, and we have a lot of people who revisionist history, or they look at history through modern day lenses, and they look at what happened at Hiroshima and the dropping of the atom bombs and how horrible it was. But what they fail to realize is what you just said. Up until the point where we got to, Okinawa and Iwo Jima, we dealt with the Japanese in this fanatical state on technically land that they didn't own. And the battle was that hard. And then we saw how they acted at Iwo Jima and Okinawa and how hard it was. And then we saw this on Saipan. And we knew that if we had to invade the mainland of Japan, every man, woman, child, grandmother, anybody who can get up and move was going to fight. Yeah. And what people don't realize is when FDR passed away and this responsibility and obligation got handed over to Truman, he didn't just willy-nilly say, okay, F them, let's drop a bomb on them. He actually got together a bunch of scientists, mathematicians, logistic officers, and created 4 separate independent groups made up of 5 or 6 of the most expertise in warfare, math, science, and separated them so they weren't co-communicating, said, hey, your job is to come up with the solution to end the war with the lowest body count. And what won? Dropping the bombs was the lowest body count. Yes, it was a tremendous amount of loss for the Japanese and Japanese civilians, but we reduced that number by taking out how many?
By millions.
Naval, Marine, Army, and by then the Australians could have been in on it, the New Zealanders could have been in on it, and even more civilians. Yeah, a lot of people died in those drop zones, but if this went on for more and more years, and we're doing basically traveling across the country, just literally fighting every 5 feet, the body count would have been 3 times as many.
Yeah.
And so as horrible as those bombs were, that was the answer to what's going to produce the lowest body count.
Don, I to your point, I found this amazing, rare interview. This journalist was sitting in a tent, and they got a hold of a Japanese officer. His uniform was in tatters. He'd been wounded.
This has been a Digital 410 production.